This, ladies and gents, is the ultimate Lightning God build for early game Cloud. Yes, you heard that right, you can actually achieve this build relatively easy and very early on as well. It deals lots of damage, it's very flashy, might also induce some seizures, so let's jump right into it. Now, the way this build works is we're gonna make use of the Plasma Discharge ability. It's one of the many abilities that you get from the enemy skill materia, and it will temporarily imbue your attacks with lightning, further dealing damage to the surrounding area each time you fill an ATB gauge. So as you fill ATB gauges, you're going to unleash this current of damage explosion, which in turn will also help you to increase your DPS in combat. Plus, it absolutely takes into account enemies' weaknesses to lightning damage. So the only thing we have to worry about is essentially boosting up the fill rate of our ATB charge. So that's why I'm going to show you a few ways to do that from quite early on, including a combination of early on skills, items, as well as some of the passives that you get on some of the early on gear. So to go over the items, this is what you're going to need. Starting with the materia, obviously you're going to want to have the enemy skill equipped, because this is going to give you access to that Plasma Discharge among some of the other skills. And like I said, to get the enemy skill materia as well as to get the Plasma Discharge, you will need the 2 biological intel in the Grasslands region. And specifically for the Plasma Discharge, you're going to have to defeat Quetzalcoatl as well as assessing 16 out of 16 enemies in the Grasslands. Once you do get it, you're going to be able to bind this quickly right here from the combat menu. Just pick Plasma Discharge. We're going to go over some of the other abilities in just a little bit as well. Now, besides this, we're going to use everything in our power to further increase the ATB gauge. So one of them is via the First Strike materia, which gives you pretty much a full ATB bar right at the start of the fight, basically, if you have a 3-star rating on it. And this is something that you also get from the Grasslands. You're going to just have to defeat a level 19 battle intel called Horror on the Range. Once you do that, you're going to get this. So it's pretty much in chapter 2 very fast as well. I also suggest adding an ATB stagger materia in the mix. It's actually pretty solid, especially since you're going to be staggering foes often with Cloud. So it gives you some extra ATB boost in there. And of course, you can also buy this relatively early. You have to just use Intel data and buy it for Chadley in Junon once you do get some Intel data for that region. But from this point on, the next most important thing is going to be this rune blade right here from chapter 4, and specifically only because of the disorder ability that it has on it. So this is actually a very strong attack that also fills the ATB gauge when all attacks with it connect. And it can also be used both on the ground as well as in the air. You get this, by the way, and also a very quick spoilers alert. It's a slight one. I'm gonna try to be as vague as possible, but you get the rune blade from chapter 4 a bit later into chapter 4, so that's going to be after a certain quote-unquote parade. And once you do get control back of your character, you're going to immediately see one of these purple chests to your right side. This is going to hold that rune blade for you. So once you unlock this, revert back to the Sleek Saber. That's going to be one of the best options, both in terms of the melee damage, but also because of some of the passive weapon skills on it. Specifically, 2 of these that provide extra ATB charge rate whenever you use actions. And you will use actions all the time, because guess what? That disorder ability is an action in and of itself. So at rank 1, you already get a 10% to the ATB recharge via the rate up. Then at 4, another ability, ATB recovery. And finally, a third one at rank 6, which bumps that up to 20%. But even before that, you're not gonna like suffer from anything if you don't have these. The only other item I recommend, which by the way also comes from chapter 4, is the Speed Demon Keychain. This further replenishes ATB gauge when using a weapon ability. You can also technically just use Whistlewind Scarf, which comes much later, pretty much as soon as you hit Calm. You can also get it from the Where the Wind Blows side quest, and it's going to actually be a very easy find, but this only like works at the start of the fight. It's not going to provide any extra regen during it. And of course, let's not forget about the Sleek Saber. You get that from the docks near the swamp area in Grassland. So actually within the first hour, you're gonna be able to just grab this right away. So let's go over how this actually looks like in practice. So whenever you start a fight, you're going to immediately start with 1 ATB charge, which is why you're going to constantly see me immediately activating that Plasma Discharge. That buff is going to be ongoing. It lasts for a very long time, if not for the entire duration of the fight. And I have never been in fights to have this run out, even in like the longest of the boss fights and encounters. So once you activate that, we're gonna then start using and charging up the ATB meter, and from this point on, we're gonna constantly use Disorder, especially up in the air. It's very easy with Cloud to dodge incoming attacks when up in the air, plus that Disorder works very well up there. The attacks technically seem to connect a bit better, especially if you do stay mid-air. And from that point on, once you do hit the enemy with that ability, you get all the buffs from that ability, plus the passives as well as that keychain. So in turn, you're going to immediately see that ATB charge immediately filling up, which means you can then use another Disorder, which feeds into another ATB charge, and rinse and repeat until you basically discharge all of these electrical attacks and deal massive damage. This works probably the best against as many enemies as possible, which is great because some of the toughest challenges put you up against an overwhelming amount of them. So whenever that happens, you can just hit somebody, immediately discharge, and yeah, this is just going to let you steamroll from that point on and like just finish the fight with no issues. Now there's only one slight problem with this, and that's going to be that you kinda spam the same abilities all the time, especially Disorder. However, you can make some very awesome abilities with it, and there are some very strong options actually that you will get if you follow that biological data and complete it for every new zone you go into. So let me show you some of them. Like I said, Sonic Boom was one of the abilities that you start with, and I suggest constantly using this because it also grants you Bravery and Faith. So these will buff your attack as well as magic power, which affects both the melee hits with your actual sword, but also that electrical damage you deal with discharge. No joke, it actually buffs you quite a bit, though unfortunately I cannot verify that in-game because the menus are separate when in combat and outside of it, and once you exit that, you can no longer see the buff. But it seems to be quite significant to the point that it's like maybe 30%, but I might be wrong on that one. So please don't quote me on that range, it might be much smaller than that. But what I've been using lately to pretty much nuke enemies out of the stratosphere is the self-destruct. This is also for the materia, and it costs 2 ATB charges. It will absolutely make Cloud self-destruct, so this will also take you out of the combat, but it's going to deal some insane amounts of damage. So the way I'm using it is I get bosses stunned first, then use the Sonic Boom to buff my damage, and then I'm gonna self-destruct when the boss is like at about 30 to 40%, which usually means you can immediately one-shot the very tough ones. So like 10,000 damage is very easy, even way before level 40 with this ability. And I know what some of you might say, well, what's the point of this if you self-destruct anyway? Well, I mean, you can just revive Cloud. I usually have Aerith with me anyway, so it's very easy, plus it brings him back to at least half HP. And by the way, you can actually do this on repeat and self-destruct multiple times in combat as long as you can revive Cloud back, or whatever character you use this on. This can be literally used on any character. If you have a favorite one, a different one, you can totally do so. There are different options, even for Tifa or for Red 13. There are some very good options in there to create builds around them. Anyway, that pretty much concludes today's video. Again, let me know down below if there's any other cool combos and other items that you found along the way. In the meantime, also check out some of the other early on options that I covered before. There are some very strong variants for pretty much every character in there. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.